Hey there, Nectar here. In this video, we're going to bounce around a number of topics, including stumbling upon a bug with Ansible 2.13 around the apt module not respecting any apt pins that you might have set. So in this video, we're going to go over what are apt pins, like how you might want to use them, etc., etc. And this is all related to basically me updating my Docker role very recently to support installing Docker Compose v2. And yeah, I imagine this video is kind of going to be in post-mortem on, how I discovered that bug. I'm not the first one to report it. There's actually a pull request open for it. So by the time that you watch this video, it may already be fixed. But, for me, there were definitely a number of lessons learned along the way. So in this video, we're going to be bouncing around, looking at servers, understanding apt pins and basically all sorts of things like that. So yeah, this all started with me yesterday wanting to update my Ansible Docker role, which installs Docker and Docker Compose. I wanted to support using Docker Compose v2. So I added all sorts of commits here. We're not going to go into details of any of them really, but yeah, I added support for Docker Compose v2. And if you're not familiar with that, that is Docker's newest edition of the Docker Compose binary itself. It's been rewritten from Python to Go, and now it's a part of the Docker binary that you can install with a plugin. And instead of running Docker-Compose, you can just run Docker space compose. And yeah, now it's just built into the Docker command line tool as a plugin. And this is the installation instructions from Docker here. And if you scroll down, eventually, and by the way, I should have mentioned here that this role is very specific to installing Docker and Docker Compose on Debian-based systems, very specifically focused on the latest two releases of Ubuntu and Debian. It may work in other ones. It definitely works with, 1804 and Debian 9. I'm just no longer officially supporting them, even though it technically works. But yeah, I just wanted to get that out of the way here. So like apt pins are very specific to Debian-based systems. But anyways, yeah, installing the Docker Compose plugin now, you just need to install this apt package after you've added Docker's upstream here to your sources list. And yeah, so now it's a little bit easier to install. You don't need to set up a Python environment, etc. Although my role still does install Docker Compose v1 if you want it. But long story short, what does this mean? Well, one of the features of this role here is that when you install Docker, which also was an apt package, docker-ce, it supports the idea of pinning a very specific version that you want. Now, if you're normally working with a Debian-based system here, let's just say Ubuntu or Debian, then depending on which version that you use, you're going to get specific versions of packages that you just apt install, right? You can apt install Nginx, and whatever the latest version happens to be for Debian 11, you're going to get that version of Nginx, or for 22.04, you're going to get whatever version of Nginx is there. You wouldn't just apt install that today and get one version, and then, a year from now, get a different version if you are using this specific version of Debian or this specific version of Ubuntu. Typically what happens is, a package will end up in the distribution list there for that specific version of Ubuntu or Debian, and then that major version is going to be supported for however many years this distro is going to be available for before it becomes end of life. So you'll get all sorts of things like security patches, maybe minor patches, I'm not 100% sure on that one, but in any case, normally Docker is, well, for me at least, an exception to that rule. I typically use Docker's sources list instead of the official one that comes with Ubuntu or Debian because, yeah, these tend to be a little bit out of date, and Docker is one of the tools where I do like to have the latest stable release there. So, you can install Docker's apt repos and you kind of pull the versions from there instead of your distro of choice. But what that means, though, is that, if you were to install Docker today, then a year from now, if you were to install Docker again, there's a very reasonable chance that you're going to get a different version of Docker. Like right now, the latest release is 2.10.17 at the time of making this video. Not super important, but you can imagine some years in the future, 20.11 is going to be out, and you wouldn't necessarily want to install a newer version just because time has changed. So apt as a system itself supports this idea of being able to pin versions to a specific version. So this role supports doing that, and now it supports it for Docker Compose v2. It also supported it with Compose v1 here because that was just a pip package. It was very easy just to install a specific version there. You can just define that. And, it's a lot more, I guess, involved than just doing like, apt-get install, Docker Compose plugin equal, or maybe single equals for apt, whatever, and then just putting in the version number. Because if you were to ever run an apt-get update and then upgrade, you would get the newer version of that if it's available. So it's important to do pinning. So that's enough talking, I think, for now. And we'll kind of just go into some details of, how that works here. And we're not going to get lost too deep into like the Ansible details here. But Ansible, just TLDR, It's a tool that allows you to provision servers and configure tools that you want to have installed and configured the way that you want. I'm definitely going to do future videos on Ansible itself, but if you're watching this video, I'm assuming you already know the basics of Ansible there. But when it comes to pinning specific versions of tools, you can place a very specific type of config file in etc apt preferences D, and then whatever file name that you want. It doesn't necessarily need to match the exact file name of the thing that you're pinning, because this will ultimately, this is a template here that I have with Ansible that is going to result in a file being output here. And if we go to, and this, by the way, this is the server that I ran Ansible against. This is the virtual machine running on my system here. But if I go to preferences D, and we'll go to, let's just start with Docker CE first here. And actually, no, I just named that one Docker, I think. Wait, what's going on here? Etc app preferences D. Oh, not CD. Of course, I want to cat that. I was wondering why tab complete wasn't working there. But yeah, the result of running this Ansible code here to enable a pinned version of Docker, if you support, setting a specific version, because, this role does allow you not to set a specific version, and you can have it just auto update if you want. But if you do set a version in the roles defaults here, then it will output what you see here in apt preferences D, docker.pref. And we can see here, there's like an explanation. Sure, I added this pin by this specific Docker role here. It's a good idea to always include, something that Ansible is managing this file here. In this case, the preferences file not just supports comments, but you can actually have an official explanation. Not super important here, but the idea with these pins, yeah, pretty basic-ish. So you have like something like the package. This is the package that you want to pin. In my case, it's docker.ce for the community editions. I have the star at the end there at the end. So it picks up, potentially other dashes that might be after CE. I think there might be one for the CLI that this package installs just for you on your behalf. Not 100% in those details, don't want to ramble on that, but that's what the star is doing there. Likewise, we have the version that we actually want to pin. So we say pin version, and then we have 20.10.13 or whatever pin that you want here. And I also have a star there to pick up some patch releases there that may potentially happen, which we kind of do want. And then we have the pin priority, and this is the really important one here. This is basically configuring a file on your system, and apt is going to be aware of this file. And actually, I think it'll be easier if we do an apt, what is this, policy on Docker CE. So what this command will run, and if you don't have Docker installed, you can just run this on a different package, right? You can run it on Bash or Nginx or I don't know, any tool that you have apt installed on your system here. But what this will do is it will go and tell you what version you have of that specific tool that you have installed. In my case, I already have Docker installed here. And then also it will let you know like what available candidates are to be installed. And we can see some numbers here in this list here, and we can see a version table basically. But these are all the available different versions of Docker CE that you can install on Ubuntu 22.04 LTS. That's what I'm running here, jammy. So we have 10.17, 16, 15, 14, 13. And we can see that most of these have a 500, and this is the pin priority. And basically, this is the default apt value. And the idea here is if your pin priority is higher than, let's say 500 here, like the highest number is going to win. So it's a common practice to, if you want to pin a specific version to something, you'd use a number higher than 500. Now, these numbers might be different with different package managers. If you're using like Arch or, CentOS or whatever. Like, I don't know the systems very well, but this is how it works with apt. And we can see here, though, that we do have a pin set for 600 on 20.10.13. However, it looks like 20.10.17 is installed. Why? Because this pin didn't take effect when Ansible apt installed the Docker CE package, and that's basically the bug. And we're going to go over how we got there and debugging that, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the very basics of how pinning works. And, this Docker role that I've had here supported pinning the Docker CE package for a really long time, like years, right? Like, I don't know how many years I've had this repository going for, but a couple. And I know this works because I have tests and I've set up dozens of systems within, and it totally, completely works fine. And by the way, if you're wondering like what this here is, this is called an apt epoch. So it is basically a way, well, it's a system designed by, I guess, whoever developed the apt system in general, where let's say you are someone like Docker, and I think Docker is actually a reasonable use case around this. Way back in the day, Docker did not version their tools like, 20.10 or 20. Whatever. It used to be just like 1. Whatever. So they completely changed their versioning scheme. So what this epoch value does, like normally this 5 defaults to a 0, and oftentimes you won't even see it defined because if it's 0, it doesn't need to be defined. But yeah, its whole purpose is to allow a tool creator like Docker or someone else to, if you accidentally, well, in this case, like if you change your versioning scheme, or if you accidentally pushed a specific version that you just want to repush with like a different name. So this epoch allows like versions to always be sorted numerically or however they need to be sorted in the correct way. It's kind of like hand wavy, but anyways, like you'll see that from time to time. So in this case, like that needs to be included here in the version. And my role takes care of that for you. Like if you don't define the 5:, when you pin it, then it will add it for you. If you do include it, then it will just like take whatever you have as is. In some case where Docker may change this number to be something else and I need to update the role, you can still have something that works. But in any case, that's what that little side topic was there. Anyways, long story short, this was working, months ago before I updated Ansible to 2.13. So I figured, okay, well, it's totally working for Docker. Why not just repeat the whole process for Docker Compose, right? So create a new Ansible task. Let's, well, in this case, it's deleting it if you don't have a version defined, but in this case, the enabling one for Docker Compose, very similar to here, just a different file. And if we go to the server here and we cut out Docker Compose, there we go. Am I recording? I am. Nice. So yeah, same exact thing here, different package name. In this case is Docker CE star, but this exact package for Docker Compose plugin. We want to pin things to 2.50 with a pin priority of 600. And if I clear that and we rerun that policy command here for Docker Compose plugin, then we will see that it also installed 2.60. Now, at the time of making this video, that happens to be the latest version. However, we can see the pin is set here at 600 for 2.5.0, and that version should have been installed. And, just to give you a little sanity check here, if I do Docker Compose version here, we can see that we really do have that installed. And if we do Docker version, or is it dash version? We'll see with Docker. Okay, well, we can see, there's the server edition there of 20.17. Now, 20.10.13 might be installed as well. Well, actually, let me do a Docker info on this one. That's because I was screwing around with some versions here while I was making this video beforehand. But in any case, like, just trust me, like, this is actually not working for the pin because I ran this against the server with Ansible 2.13, but it works with Ansible 2.12, but we'll get to there. Where is it going here? We were talking about Docker Compose plugin. Yes, so inside of my Ansible configuration here, for this role, the idea here with Ansible, well, definitely going to have to blur out those comments. This is like a work in progress type of thing. But if you look down here, we have our Docker Compose v2 version as well as the Docker version over here. And by default, they are set to empty strings because this role doesn't really want to necessarily version lock a specific version of Docker and Compose for you because, those numbers are always changing. That should be up to you if you want to opt into that behavior. So this idea with Ansible is, you can override a role's default here and define whatever you want. So I'm overriding that version here with I want to install specifically 20.10.13 and for Compose 2.5.0. So that's how these pins on the server were set, right? I overrided those role defaults here. Ansible ran, and then we have those files on disk here for these preferences files, but yet things didn't work. Why? Because inside of here in the code, when eventually Docker or Ansible is going to install Docker and Docker Compose v2 here, just using the apt module here. This name is a list here. There's two different packages, potentially Docker Community Edition, other editions, it supports them as well. But we can see here that Docker Compose plugin is part of that list there. So, and also like it'll retry a couple of times in case, there's a lock on your, apt sources list or whatever the heck it is. Like anyways, like I've had this fail, if unintended upgrades or something else just has a lock on apt. So you might want to do that if you're not doing that already in your Ansible roles. But anyways, that's the way everything gets installed. And needless to say, nothing is working. For around half an hour at least, I was just trying to figure out what's going on here. It's like, I know months ago that this pin was working for Docker. Why the heck isn't it working for Docker Compose? So you do debugging wise, I don't know about you, but typically if something doesn't work, the first thing I do is I, delete things and then just recreate them and just see if it works the second time around. So what I did there was, fairly simple stuff. I just uninstalled the Docker Compose plugin, which means that Docker Compose v2 is removed from the system. And then I just reinstall things and the same exact result happened for that. And in fact, if you go to the README file here, this command, trying to find the exact one that I ran here, is the exact command that I ran. So this Ansible command over here will take this package, Docker Compose plugin. It is going to remove it and basically purge it. It's the equivalent of basically running a sudo apt remove Docker Compose plugin -- purge and basically removes it completely from the host. So then I reinstalled it. Same thing. The pin is there, but not taking effect. And yeah, I don't know, like at least like a solid 45 minutes later, I'm like, I don't know, like what is going on here? This is some craziness. Like I know this pin works for Docker. Why isn't it working for Docker Compose? These files are like identical, just with the package names being changed. So I ended up reaching out to my friend. Well, he's the creator of the DevOps repository here. And actually, this whole entire video, I did make a blog post about this one. I'll link to it in the description. Right now, it's on localhost. It'll be hosted by the time you watch it, but I'm just trying to find this one link to him. Yeah. So he has this project here. It's a very long-running Ansible project where he has, hundreds of different roles and playbooks, and he's built up like a whole infrastructure for the university that he was working at. And yeah, he is a friend of mine, and sometimes we chat about all sorts of different sysadmin things or just, general apps in general. And I asked him, like, any ideas what's going on there? And, he gave me some really good advice. So he looked at the files that I had and like, these files are good. Like this should be working in theory, like air quotes. But he gave me some really good advice that, sometimes you forget about these things when you're just in the moment of trying to debug something. And it was like, well, let's rewind and, remove some variables from the equation here. Like what happens if you, just apt install Docker Compose plugin directly on your server instead of using Ansible? So I can actually run some of this stuff here. Let's just see. Let's do an apt remove on Docker Compose plugin, and we'll purge that. Okay, so now Docker Compose version wouldn't work once this command finishes running. We can see that it's removed Docker Compose plugin 2.6.0. And then if I run a Docker Compose version here, it's going to be like, nope, command not found here. Why? Because the plugin's no longer available to run as a Docker command. Totally makes sense. Exactly what we want. And if we go back to, cutting out this apt preferences file for Docker Compose plugin, we can see that our pin is set to 2.5, right? There's a pin priority. Just as a reminder, like, apt policy, Docker Compose plugin. This should now theoretically install Docker Compose 2.50. Why? Because the pin priority 600 is higher than the 500 here, higher than the 500 there. And now if we do sudo apt-get install Docker Compose plugin, I should have did the -y here. It's going to ask me if I want it, or I guess apparently not. Then it is installing, though. You can see it installed version 2.50 here. And, well, I'll clear the screen. It's not important really to see that. But if I do a Docker Compose version here, we will see that Docker Compose version 2.5.0 is available. And now if I were to run like an apt-get update and then an apt-get upgrade, then even though 2.6.0 is available, it is going to stay pinned. So this is now an interesting situation, right? Like we know for sure, like the apt mechanism itself around pinning is completely working fine on the system. Like this has to be an Ansible problem. And even before I messaged him on IRC, like I tried all sorts of little things here, like in this file, like, you start rewinding things, right, a little bit. Like I got rid of this loop here to, instead of installing, 2 packages, I split these out to 2 separate tasks. I did, each one individually there. I renamed name to PKG because I know if you look at Ansible's documentation for the apt module, PKG is technically an alias for name, but I don't know, at some point you just start reaching for things like who knows, what the code is under the hood there. I've never looked at it. Maybe there's like some weird subtle difference and maybe something got changed, or, maybe they changed something that I wasn't aware of because, I don't always look at the detailed changelog of every single release of everything, especially now that Ansible, yeah, well, I'm not going to get into that around how they broke out the packages into lots of different things. Like it's a little bit harder to track what's changing and what's related to what. But in any case, yeah, this stuff wasn't working before I messaged him. Yeah, so we can see here that this is all good to go here, and it is all working on the server when you run it manually. So, I mean, at that point, like, we have to figure, like, there is something wrong with Ansible in that regard, like, specifically when you apt install a package. And it's kind of funny when you break problems down, like, it is so much easier to find a solution to the problem when you actually know what the problem is, because now what's the problem? Well, the problem is, like, apt pinning not working with Ansible. And like I literally Googled for like apt pinning not working with Ansible, and then I found an issue that ultimately led to this pull request. Now, at the time of making this video, near the end of August 2022, it is open here. So, Ansible 2.13, app preferences pinning, it just isn't working. And yeah, this pull request fixes that. And hopefully at some point it gets merged in. I don't know if it'll be fixed in a 2.13 release. I'm guessing it will be because it's like a legitimate bug. But yeah, I mean, once we knew the exact problem, finding the solution wasn't too bad. And in my case, what I ended up doing was I just downgraded to Ansible 2.12 and then confirmed that the role itself is functioning correctly. And the issue there was using, yeah, just a version of Ansible that had a bug there. And so this blog post kind of just, sometimes I like writing these things out before the videos, often not, but like this one, I don't know, it's one of those fun ones where you get to reflect on something. And yeah, let's see, is there anything in here that I didn't speak about on video here? Because there definitely is like a lessons learned here at the end, but let's see, yeah, this is all like, now what, this is going through the whole process of what I did, blah, 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 blah. Call on the IRC Lifeline for creator of DevOps here. And yeah, just reducing the problem, not using Ansible, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, here's like the real takeaway for me, right? Like internal biases can be a real bitch here. So, I don't know if this is like literally the correct like medical definition, or a psychologist would say exactly this, but like for me, like what's an internal bias, right? It's when you let your internal thoughts guide you into decision or a specific way of thinking without treating everything on equal ground. So like, I don't know about you, let me know in the comments below, but when I'm working with, popular tools like web frameworks or libraries or whatever, I am so used to this workflow here where it's like, it's not working. Then I'm just completely like WTF'd multiple times to myself because I'm completely bewildered or perplexed, or what is going on? Like, it's just not working. Then I start writing a GitHub issue explaining the situation because I'm about to file a bug report, because if it's not working, I've tried so many different things, like, oh, it's broken, right? But then, kind of discover I'm an idiot along the way here while writing the bug report, because you know how it is usually. Once you start like really like taking things down chunk by chunk, trying to create a reproducible bug, yeah, you usually, well, for me at least, like oftentimes like I'll find a root cause there that it's something I overlooked, or like something I like 87% understand, but like that last 3% to get me to the 90% mark was just something that, yeah, it was like overlooked or just didn't understand. So yeah, then it's like, okay, cool. All right, I understand now. Let me delete that draft and, get it working, and then fist pump. Fist pump is really important. But yeah, I mean, that's the workflow of basically me as a software developer. So, then oftentimes like I'll reflect on that, right? Like I'll write a blog post, make a video, chalk it up to lessons learned. I love this whole process, right? Like the whole journey from the struggle to the resolution to all that stuff. Like it's learning, it's cool, it's fun. That's what I like to do. But it's an internal bias sometimes because I am so used to that above workflow, and I completely discounted that the idea that Ansible might actually have a bug, because I know from personal experience from prior engagements here, the ratio to reporting a bug and actually reporting it and posting it, right? Not just like writing it out on GitHub and then just like deleting the draft or closing the tab without saving it. Much different frequency, a lot more writing them, a lot less posting them. And, I didn't mention this in the video here, but like, I've been using Ansible for a really long time, like 7, 8, 9, something like that years. And I think this might be the first time I ever ran into an actual legit bug where Ansible didn't work for me because a module just wasn't working the way it was intended here. But yeah, going back down to here, the takeaway for me there isn't like, haha, I'm so smart. Like finally it's a tool that was broken, it wasn't me finally. But no, like really remind myself of going back to the basics, right? Break down the problem and reduce the variables. Like these are things I know, but sometimes you need to be reminded of them. So yeah, I mean, I've developed lots of different Ansible roles, like over 20 or 30 of them, thousands of lines of code, just working with Ansible a lot, like managing dozens of systems with them, blah, 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 blah. And it all starts with me. Like if I'm developing a new Ansible role, I get everything working manually, like without even using Ansible, right? You need to understand the system. And then once you understand the system, you can automate it with Ansible. Like that is a really good pattern. Yeah, in this case, I sort of knew how apt pinning worked. Like I know a little bit better now that I did a little bit more research about certain things, but generally speaking, like I sort of knew what was going on there. So I kind of just skipped that step of just testing that out, especially knowing that like the apt pin code worked exactly with Docker before that. But yeah, I don't know, like another takeaway here is like, I didn't get flustered during this, a little adventure here, but it is a reminder just not to like flip your lid, right? You're in control of these situations, and with enough, elbow grease or, putting some time and effort into there, you will find your solution. So, if Mache wasn't there to help me, then, I'm pretty sure I would have figured it out. It just would have taken me like 5 times longer. So yeah, never underestimate having a friend to call upon. That's another one. But yeah, I mean, that's basically this whole video, I guess. Just going over little things like that. I'm going to spare you the details here of, downgrading to Ansible 2.12.8, I think was the one that I have installed previously, and just seeing it work. But like, it does work. Like, I promise you it does. So yeah, that's basically it for this video here. And I will see you in the next one. So if you have any questions about any of this, let me know below. Also, let me know, like, what are some of your most recent debugging stories? Doesn't need to be necessarily Ansible related, but what was something where you just broke things down? Maybe that workflow there that we went over before. So yeah, let me know. Also, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up because it really does help a lot. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next video.